Welcome to week 4 of Into the Current. Welcome to week 4. It's good to have you here. It's good to have you here. We're talking about stepping into the current. We've talked about stepping into the stream of God's kingdom, right? We're talking about stepping into the stream of God's kingdom. In order to do that, we have to step out, we have to turn around, and then we have to step in to his stream and walk in his ways. And we're so excited we've been talking about we don't want normal, right? The new normal, we said, it's kind of bad. It's kind of gross. Like, who wants to be in the new normal? The new normal is not a good thing. Instead, we want meaning, we want purpose, we want identity. And we find purpose in who we are more than what we do, right? Pastor Cindy came last week and she had an amazing message about identity and talked about that we find our purpose oftentimes in our identity and in our values first, and then we build it from there. But there's a stacking from this. Find your identity, find the values of Christ's values. And we talked about values a couple weeks ago. In fact, we talked about values in Matthew 5 through 7. We talked about the 12 main values, right? We put it up here, right? We said, do not hate or be bitter toward each other. Do not look at each other with intent to take from one another sexually. Do not divorce each other for petty indifferences. Do not lie to one another. Do not get revenge on one another. Have love even for your enemies and do right to those who persecute you. Give to the needy among you. When you pray, pray in secret. When you fast, not if you fast, fast in secret. Serve God and each other with your money instead of hoarding money for your own self. Do not worry about tomorrow, but instead trust in God. And do not judge each other. These are the things to do to cling into becoming more and more of who we are meant to be. This is the stream. That's the current that we're talking about. That's the current. That's the ways of the king. When we step into those ways, we are stepping into the current. And that's all from Matthew chapter 5 through 7. Hopefully you've been reading that. Hopefully you actually go home and you open this thing. It's called the Bible. And you might have it, or you can download a Bible app and you can actually read through these words. You don't have to just take my word for it. Some scribe wrote it some 2,000 years ago in a beautiful pamphlet, and now we've printed it, and it's amazing, and we've made it digital, and it's incredible. But at the end of Matthew 5 through 7, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus actually has some closing thoughts. So he said, these are the ways. And then he says, here's some closing thoughts. Number 1, ask for anything within these values, and it will be given to you. Remember, we're not necessarily asking for cars or more money or more things. You can ask for those things. It just might not be given to you. Aw. Right? We can ask, but it might not be given. But he says if you ask for anything within those 12 areas, if you ask for God to help you with your bitterness, if you ask for God to help you with your marriage, if you ask for God to help you within the way you treat other people, man, it's going to be given to you. That's exciting. That's really good news because these things are kind of difficult and hard to walk out at times. Number 2, he says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then he says this one, he goes, it's not really a closing statement. It kind of paraphrases the whole thing. Right? Does nobody else that read the Bible? Okay, but that's what he kind of says. He said, basically, if you forget these 12, remember the 12 I just rattled off? Does anybody remember number 7? And I just read it, and we've been covering it for like 3 weeks. It can be hard to remember all 12, even though it's only 12. And I love that. God's like, hey, let me simplify this for you. But then he goes, let me simplify it for you even more. If you're forgetting where you go, and I would summarize it, I put the idea of do right by others, right? You can put up do right by others. You can go ahead and, there it is, do right by others. In fact, he says, in fact, this kind of sums up, and then Jesus says this, right? In fact, this sums up all the law and the prophets. Now you can see why the Pharisees wanted to kill him right away. He actually is taking 1,033 pages of all of their heritage. He's going, I could do that in about 4 words. Do right by others? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like, we could do this in a sentence. That's kind of what he says. It's crazy. And basically but he goes on. So he kind of summarizes it. So again, just remember, if you're going around today and you're like, I can't only remember what's the ways of Jesus. How do I step out of the current, turn around and step into the current? When I'm stepping into the current, what does it mean? What does it look like? Oh, do right by others. If I forgot number 7, just do right. What would Jesus do here in this situation right now? Oh, okay, do that thing, right? So it's really simple. It's really simplified for us. And then what's really powerful to me, though, is Jesus goes on just a little bit further. And this is so powerful. He goes into, this is number 3. He says, few, he ends the whole thing with few will choose this way of life, but the few who do choose it will find life in it. That's one of his concluding statements to the whole sermon. Matthew 7 says it this way. Listen to this. This is the famous narrow is the way, right? Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. Wide is the gate of bitterness, and many enter through it, and it leads to destruction. Wide is the gate to giving up on your marriage for petty indifferences, and many enter through it, and it leads to destruction. Wide is the gate for people who choose not to fast. And many enter through it, and it leads to destruction. Wide is the gate. Wow, dude. Oh, but small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few will find it. Remember this, Jesus is not talking about the heaven and hell here. Sometimes in our evangelical American Christianity, we like to make this a heaven and hell verse. That's not what Jesus was talking about. Jesus was talking about, put up the ways one more time. Jesus is talking about the ways, the values, the commands, the ways of following him. And he's going, wide is the gate that people who won't follow this way, but narrow is the gate of people who actually adopt this into their lifestyle and walk in this practice. Let's quick. Do good to those who persecute you. Give to the needy. Love those who hate you. Get rid of all types of bitterness. Don't take from others sexually. This is the narrow road. And it's still the narrow road. Right? It's still the narrow road. It's the narrow road, and few are finding it to this day. In fact, I would say it this way. Society loves to ignore these ways of Jesus, and religion loves to distort these ways of Jesus. But what I would say is that there is a power in the way of Jesus. There is hope in the way of Jesus. And at the end, he says, not only is there hope, there's life in the stream. There's life in the currents of my ways. There's life and life abundant. And this was the good news. You could enter in right away. Matthew 7, at the very end, he concludes with this. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words, the words that we've been looking at, the 12 values, everyone who hears those of mine and puts them into everybody, say the word. Woo, have you been practicing on your bitterness? How's that practice been on that fasting? How's the practice on prayer been going for you? How's the practice on not judging other people? We got a judgment culture going on. Just get on TikTok. Man, all I do is fly to the comments. Those judgment, they're funny. We got that in spades, baby. Do not judge others. What do you mean? Everyone hears it and puts them into practice is like a wise man. But check this out. It's a wise man. I love to get all preachy on this one. Who builds his house on Christ the solid rock I stand. Right? On what? On the values, on the ways, on these 12 ways, these 12 teachings. And check this out. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine does not put them into, everybody say the word, practice. Practice. We talking practice? It's like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. And when Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. What are we saying? If you want to build on solid ground in this life, do what Jesus laid out. Do the 12 things. Do the 12 commands. Call them commands, call them ways, call them values. I don't care what word you put to them, but do them. Step into the current. If you want to build your house on sand, don't do those things. Don't do those things. And you have all types of issues and bitterness and seared relationships and hurt and pain and distress and anxiety and anguish, and you're like, what's happening? That's what happens. You'll constantly be searching. Your circumstances as they come and go will constantly change your narrative. Your meaning and your purpose will ebb and flow. You'll never be able to get a good track or a good grasp on it. And I love that, right? I notice something about these values right now. None of them have to do with your job title. Is your water bottle okay? Dude, that was the loudest, heaviest water bottle. Like, that is like made of tank formation. Like, I thought someone passed out. And then I looked down, it's just a water bottle tipped over. That is a weapon of, don't mess with Leslie, y'all. She don't need to carry. She is carrying. She carrying a water bottle, everybody. Yikes. What was I talking about? These values. Check this out. This is so cool to me. Not a single one of these values are based on job title. Not a single one of them are based on socioeconomic status. Not a single one of them is based on performance. Not a single one of them is based on achievement. Not a single one. Do you see why it leads to life? Because it doesn't matter. You could pull my job, you could pull certain relationships, you could pull my title, you could pull my socioeconomic status, or in other words, that could ebb and flow. And I will still be standing solid because I'm walking in the values and the ways of Jesus. Do you see why he came to a bunch of poor people in the Middle East and he said, I have good news for you, because you can find success even though you may never climb the worldly ladder? Woo, that's good. This is why it's good news, because all of that can shatter. That's what he's saying, all of it. The wind of life can come, the circumstances that are outside of your control could come, and your whole value, your identity, your purpose, your meaning, all of that stays intact. All of that stays intact. It doesn't cave. It's so good. They're all internal decisions within your control. That's the beauty of walking in purpose. You're built on the rock and much more in control. We'll talk about more of that next week. Much more in control of this thing than we like to think we are. Not with external circumstances, but we'll get to that next week. Okay. Remember, the book Insight, right? We've looked at this book, Insight. It's by Tasha Eurek. We were talking about finding your purpose. She talks about finding your purpose in this. I love it. And she says you have to ask 4 main questions. Finding my purpose is, what are my values? What are my passions? What are my aspirations? And what is my ideal environment? We've really been hanging on values, and then Pastor Cindy came and talked about identity, which has everything to do with all of these things. But I want to look at the second question just really fast, which is, what are my passions? And remember with my values, remember how we said, hey, what are my values? That's good. You can go kind of answer that. You could explore that on your own if you want to. You can get the book. You can do all the things, right? But remember, we kind of talked about, yeah, you can have some of your own values, but they're secondary to Christ's values if you're saying you're a Christian, if you're saying you're following Christ. Then the first 12, if you can get through the first 12 and then still like, oh, I have more. Oh, that's not supposed to be up yet. That's okay, though. I'll get to that. I was setting it up. My media person's like, move on. You've got more to say. You got to keep clipping, brother. What am I saying? What are my values, right? My values we get from Christ. Okay, but when it comes to passions, the cool part about passions is you get to figure this out. Go ahead and put these questions up. What kind of day would make you leap out of bed in the morning? I'm not going to read them all, but just like in the past, I'm going to encourage you, take out your phone. If you have purpose work to do and you haven't asked some of these, take out your phone and ask this. Also, I'm going to let you know, look at this cute, amazing, awesome booklet. You see this? It's called Into the Current. And when you open it up, it's going to have all 4 weeks of this series that we've covered, and you're going to all get one as you leave the door, just as a courtesy to you. So if you have purpose work to do, but you don't have time to go buy the book, read the book, you could buy this. It's an awesome resource we did for you. Thank you for clapping. That made me feel so happy and proud. You're going to work on it all week. Good. You need this. So yeah, you can do that. But this one, well, the cool part about passions is this one I believe you get to color in. This is part of God's relationship with you. He invites you in, and it's not like he has everything stocked, right? We all have different passions. He's created us all into all different ways. Your values, your Christ-like values, are going to go with you wherever you go. But your passions can shift. You might have a passion for woodworking. Go do construction. You might have a passion for math. God bless your soul. Go do engineering. You might have a passion for homemaking. Be a stay-at-home mom. That's still an awesome occupation, even in 2024 America. Take that, Barbie. They drove the point home really well, actually. Okay. They encompassed it all. But I think God loves it when we get to do whatever we want. But remember, your values go with you no matter where you go. If you're a construction worker, you don't leave for the construction values. If you're a stay-at-home mom, the Christ-like values come with you. If you're an engineer, the Christ-like values come with you. And not only do your values go with you, there's something else that comes with you. It's called this word aspirations, right? And that's the other thing she said. What are my aspirations? So think about my values and my aspirations. They come with me everywhere I go, even when I don't want them to. Your values and aspirations are always around. They're always hanging around. What are my aspirations? Another way to ask this question I love is, how do I want to leave a dent in the world? Woo! That's got some goodness on it. In fact, Steve Jobs once said, I want to make a dent in the universe. This is the essence of the third pillar of insight, the third pillar of purpose, how you discover your purpose, your identity, what you want to experience and achieve. And again, I love this question. And you can go through the book or through our source right here. I'll have all the questions for you. As you leave, and now Tasha Urich has a couple questions that are great to ask if you've never asked them, but I want to remind you, this question also has a Christ-like answer. Don't you love when a teacher does the test work for you? Don't you love, I loved, because I was always like a C student, you know what I mean? Sometimes a B, but I never knew when that D or F was coming. You know, I never did. So when the teacher get up at the beginning of the test and she'd be like, hey, I got 2 or 3 answers for you because the question is worded badly. Oh, yes, I'm on my way to a C, maybe a B. That D just went in the rearview mirror. This is how Jesus kind of does. This is how God kind of works. He gives you a couple of the answers in stock, and if you just follow it, you could be on your way to a C or a B without even a ton of effort, right? You don't even have to go find it. It's amazing. But how are we meant to do it? What kind of dent are we meant to leave? Let me show you what it looks like in Scripture. Let me show you what a Christ-like aspiration is meant to look like. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Psalm 82 says, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Well, that's just 2 verses. Oh, Micah 6 says, tells us to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. Proverbs 31 says, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute, and then tells us to defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Zechariah 7 says, administer true justice, show mercy, and show compassion. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other. Jeremiah 22 says, do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor, the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. Deuteronomy 10, this is all the way back to the beginning, tells us that God himself is about this type of business. It says that God defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. These verses constantly emphasize the importance of justice, the importance of mercy, the importance of care for those who are on the outside looking in, for those who are marginalized, for those who are vulnerable, for those who are oppressed looking in. And then Jesus shows up on the scene, because that's just Old Testament. And that's just one Google thing, because you can use Google to find out Bible verses. And it's just one thing. You just type in and go, give me some justice verses. And I just clicked the first 8. There's more and more and more and more. But then Jesus shows up, and the gospel are littered with stories that involve this thought process. You can look at the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, the lost sheep and the lost coin, the parable of the talents, the parable of the sower. Jesus is sharing story after story after story that's attempting to illustrate to his culture in their ways just how important it is to lay down your social status, your socioeconomic status, your feeling like your rights or your freedom to go into the world and help the marginalized and the oppressed. And then near the end of Jesus' time, we read in Matthew chapter 25, and he says, for I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And then it tells us that the righteous begin to go, when? God, Jesus, we never even knew we were doing that for you. What? Yeah, Pop. Yeah, we never even knew we were doing that for you. I couldn't go where I wanted to go, because theological stuff. We don't need to spin people's hairs, you know what I mean? Oh, now it's spin the wires. But he said, when did we do this for you? Jesus, I'm confused. And then he says this powerful line, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Don't you see? Don't you see that? You could go from the beginning of the Bible through the prophets into Jesus' life and even into the end of his ministry. And what are the aspirations? How are you meant as a Christ follower to leave a dent in this world? It doesn't come with more boats. It doesn't come with more house. It doesn't mean more cars. It doesn't mean more money just for money's sake, more investments for some type of rainy day. No. The way of Jesus has within it incredibly deep meaning and purpose. It has us taking care of the downtrodden. It has us seeking out those who are hopeless. It has us finding those who are lacking in life and lifting them up. It has us finding the faithless and offering faith. It has us finding people who are stuck in the hopeless of situations and saying, I have some tangible, real life hope for you. And it doesn't start just when we get to heaven. I am the beacon of Jesus on earth. I have been walking in the current of the ways of the kingdom. And because I've been walking in the current of the ways of the kingdom, I have life and life abundant to offer you. Do you see? If you want one of the deepest purposes within life, one of the deepest meanings within life, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of your current title, you start walking in the ways of Jesus. And you don't just start walking, you start practicing the ways of Jesus. You start learning the ways of Jesus. More on that next week. I love when I say that because I just feel so like I'm prepared. You know? You gotta be ready. Okay. The last thing I want to look at super quick, and we're gonna close this whole series up, is there's a fourth question, and it's what is my ideal environment? What's my ideal environment? Again, just like your passions, you get to go hang out, right? What's your ideal environment? By the way, this is a great question. What's your ideal environment as a construction worker? What's your ideal environment as a stay-at-home mom? Sometimes you don't get to choose that. 2-year-olds are crazy. What's your ideal environment as an engineer? You get to answer that on an organizational platform. Am I right? It's okay, guys. They'll get the ladder. What's happening? But as a Christian, do you know one of your most ideal environments that you could walk into? Anybody? You're in it. Whoa. Where am I? Church. Church is one of your most, it's literally built up. Jesus from the beginning of time said, here's your values. Let me remind you of your aspirations. But before I go, Peter, disciples, remember, you're going to have to build a gathering because you need to keep coming at least weekly. They were going daily. Should we do this daily? They were going daily, right? Because of the gathering. And what are they doing at these gatherings? Reminding me of my values. Help me walk in the values of Christ. Remind me of the aspirations. Because it's easy when I walk out there to get distracted. It's easy to forget the purpose. It's easy to think my life becomes more and more actually meaningless. Even as I climb the ladder of the world, it's foreshadowing. Even as I climb the ladder of the world, I can forget my purpose. I can start to forget my meaning. I can start to forget what I'm supposed to be doing. And so your aspirations and your values are two things that we're always wanting to put in front of us as Christians here at church. You have fellowship. You get reminded. You're not just here as another seat. You're getting encouraged in the ways of Jesus. You're getting reminded that there's life and life abundant. You're being reminded about the aspirations and the values of Jesus. And then when you found the stream yourself, for some of us, we've been walking in the stream for quite a while. Sometimes we need to step back off and go get somebody else and bring them in. We'll talk about that another time. What's this series? Into the current. Step into the current. Step into the current. I want to encourage you to step into the current because there is deep meaning in this current. You can walk in God's values in this current, and you can find life and life abundant. And you can find when something breaks down, you can find that it's still steady, it's still solid. You can discover your identity, your God-sized identity, and you can walk in that. And I cannot describe to you the sturdiness when you're walking in step in God's identity. The sturdiness you feel regardless of where you're at, regardless of who walks up to you. But I want to conclude this series with the simplest, but maybe most important question of all, which is this. Which way will you choose? This series is so much fun. It's exciting. It's good preaching, right? There's been great worship. We've introduced new songs. It's all good. We have pamphlets for you on the way out to resource you so you can do some homework, which we love. But ultimately, if we end and you don't choose a direction, it's not going to change your life. In fact, you could talk about streams, right? The series is called Into the Current. Have you ever been in two currents at the same time? It creates like a whirlpool. There's all types of currents where if they counteract with each other and you're caught in the middle, do you know what they call them? They call them converging currents. You know what converging currents are? They're dangerous. They're dangerous. And you know what they lead to? Exhaustion. That's what Google told me. It leads to exhaustion. See, and I think there's too often, oh wow, there's two ladders here. If I just had two ladders on the stage right now, I could do something so cool. Remember how Cindy last week had the table of the world and the table of Jesus? Table of the world, table of Jesus. And one said you got to perform, you got to please, you got to achieve. This is the bedrock of the world's ladder, is to perform, to please, and achieve. And too often, some of us are already asking, why didn't you choose, why is the world's ladder higher? Because that's what they promise you. You got to turn it on. Perform, please, and achieve. That's the bedrock. And I could climb, but if you're not noticing, oh God, see? I actually don't like heights, so I'm not even playing. Stop, don't touch it. I didn't plan that, but I knew God was going to make a point while I was on this ladder. See, because the way of the world is perform, please, and achieve. But the moment you don't perform, the moment you don't please, the moment you don't achieve perfectly, and the higher you go, the more narrow it gets, and you got to do this thing perfectly, and it's actually pretty shaky. But Pastor Cindy helped us find out. She said the way of Jesus, golly. You get here through Jesus first. On Christ the solid. A lot of times I like to just hang out right here. It's very safe. But then he talked about faith and grace. And I'm trying to say that as you climb the ladder of God, you get to Jesus, faith, and grace. But there's even more. That's step one. That's step two. But there is meaning. There's purpose. There's identity. There's all types of things up here. And God wants to continue to invite you into his ways and his kingdom. And there's other heights you can go to. But too often, let me tell you what we do too often. Too often, we never set our direction. And what we do is we go, wow, I want a little bit of Jesus, but I also want to perform. I want a little bit of grace, but I also want to please. I want a little bit of grace, faith. But I also want to achieve. And we'll keep climbing these ladders at the same time. And before too long, you're feeling a tension. And before too long, you're curious, why do I feel like I'm hitting a ceiling? Because you haven't committed, because you actually haven't set your direction. And I want to encourage you at the end of the series, do not go on to another day. Do not go on to another week. But if you would just set your direction, God has limits for you. God has no limits for you. God has capabilities for you. God has purpose for you. God has destiny for you. God has life for you. God has meaning for you. And it's still solid all the way at the top. No matter how high it goes, it's solid because it's Christ, the solid rock, that stays at the bottom of this one. I'm telling you. You can stand up with me across the room. Which way will you choose? Which way will you choose? Will you try to go both ways? By the way, one of the lies, I'm going to say this. One of the lies here is too often we think we're trading this. Too often we think we're trading this. But if you're a Christ follower, even a halfway Christ follower, you know the lukewarm type, you know the ones who haven't set the direction, you're not trading the heights of this ladder, y'all. If you're still coming to church, but you're still trying to do both feet, you're trading this. This is what you're finally leaving behind. Because if you're saying in the room, well, I'm not going to stop following Jesus, but I still want parts of this. This is the highest you can get. This is what you're actually leaving behind. It's a good thing to leave behind. And this is strong, right? Jesus said, be in the world, but not of it. There's also verses about God saying, I'll spit you out. Listen, I don't think there's the vengeance, wrathful piece of him spitting you out. I think it's part of grace, because you'd be better off. Let me help you with this. You'd be better off leaving the ways of Jesus completely. Oh, does the preacher just say that? Yeah, because at least you have your direction. And when the waves come and the storms come, you're not going to be blaming God for it. At least you'll be able to diagnose the problem correctly. But if you're here, you'll always feel this exhaustion and this tiredness, and you're like, God, what's going on? Where are you? He's like, you're standing on two different ladders, you buffoon. Help yourself. Set your direction. Set your direction. Today. Do not go on another day walking in the stream of the world. Do not continue on becoming more and more normal, just leading to more and more things that the world's continuing to churn out. More debt, more divorce, more obesity, more all of these things. No. Step out of that stream. Turn around and step into the current of the ways of the kingdom. And I'm telling you, he has something powerful for you. He has deep meaning. He has deep purpose. He has deep identity. It's going to take some time. That's okay. You're not going to get there all in a week. We're going to talk more about that next week. Isn't it amazing when we give ourselves the grace of time? Jesus gives you the grace of time. But today, I'm going to ask you actually to close your eyes. We're going to sing a song. It's an old song. It's a beautiful song. It's got a lot of power on it. The words are so simple. It's, I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. Today, as much as you can, I want to encourage you to picture the 12 values. The 12 ways. You don't have to have them all memorized, that's okay. But just remembering the sentiment of them. Remembering the notion of them and deciding right now, you know what, God, I don't even know what that's all going to require or what that's all going to take, but I want to commit. And I want you to picture that you're stepping off of this ladder and stepping onto the ladder of the kingdom. That you're stepping out of one stream and stepping into the stream, into the current of the kingdom. And I want you to picture it as you sing, I have decided. And what I'm going to invite you to do is, as we sing this, I have decided, I want to invite you to put both hands up in the air as a sign to Jesus. I'm fully committed. I'm setting my direction. I'm going to follow you all the way.
I have decided
to follow Jesus.
No turning back. No turning back.
Come on.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus.
Step into the stream.
I have decided
It's a good stream.
to follow
It's
Jesus.
flowing with love.
No turning
Grace.
back. No turning
Come on, sing it out. Come on, declare it. Come on, declare it.
decided to follow
pray that as we learn to set our direction, that you will continue to reveal purpose and meaning and identity, that we will continue to accept grace for ourselves, for who we are in you. God, thank you for never demanding perfection. God, I pray that we would just set our direction, and as we do, you would do what you always do. God, I pray that there would be a lot of grace that goes out with us, that we would be understanding that there is lots of practice still to be done. There's lots of positioning, there's lots of practice, there's lots of process, and that's okay. You're so gracious and kind with us in the midst of those practices, those processes. God, I pray that as we continue to learn your ways and grow in your ways, that we would continue to feel that sense of a solid rock below our feet, the sturdiness of life, and that we would continue to get life and life abundant because of it. And I pray for it in Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen. Amen. Two things real quick before you leave. Two things. One is obviously always we have a prayer room. We do have a prayer room. You can go out if you're in your highest of highs or your lowest of lows. We'd love to pray with you. Two,